Hey, welcome to our channel, Homeschooling with Zena. So I decided to make this channel because I thought it's good for educating parents that homeschooling is a pretty good option. So um, I don't know, like every day I'm going to make a video um, of me teaching Zena a certain um, subject or something like that. So now we're towards the end of our well, we're like a little bit over 50% of our history. So we're doing history one. We're doing the K-12 curriculum, and this is history one. We're a little bit over 50%. So we're gonna start here. And this is Zena. Say hi, Zena.
Hi.
Okay. So, lesson 10 is Greek myths, Arachne and King Midas. Can you say that? Arachne and King Midas.
Arachne and King Midas.
Very good.
Another king?
Uh huh. Let's see if you can read this. So, I want you to read this.
You mean that the ancient Greeks told stories called myths about their gods and goddesses. Some myths explained how things came to be wild. Others showed what happened when people made unwise decisions.
So, good. Um, do you know what a decision is? Hmm? What is a decision?
I think a decision is like kind of things need to do.
Okay, when you make up your mind to do something, and unwise.
Unwise. You
Yeah.
not wise.
I guess not smart. Yeah, not wise. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to hit the arrow. You only have to hit it once. Okay. Um did the ancient Greeks have one god or many gods and goddesses?
Many gods and goddesses.
Okay, how were the Greek gods and goddesses like people?
Oh, they need to eat. They need to sleep.
Mhm.
They sometimes bad or good.
Mhm.
They can be also happy and sad.
Okay. Mm, didn't they eat something? I forgot the name of it. I think it was called am. Do you remember
Ambrosia.
ambrosia?
Ambrosia.
Right? You remember that? Okay. So, how were the Greek gods and goddesses different from people?
They can live forever. They can live forever.
What do you call that when you can live forever? What do you call that when you can live forever? What do you call that? Immortality.
Immortality.
Yeah, being immortal. Guys, I also want to say that my daughter was not a native speaker. She's not a native speaker. She's half Chinese. So a year ago, she actually couldn't speak any English. So it's been a great progress for 1 year. Where do they live?
Oh, they live on the uh, Olympus hill. Mount Olympus.
Good, Mount Olympus. Who was the king of the Greek gods and goddesses?
Zeus.
Good. Okay, so we're gonna change. Keep still. And if you want to know the answers, you can just,
Tap the answers.
yeah, you can click on here. The ancient Greeks told many stories called myths about their gods and goddesses. Some of the myths explain how things came to be. Do you remember the myth about how the land of Greece was made? The Greeks said that their land was made when one of the gods threw a pile of stones over his shoulder. That myth explained how the land of Greece came to be and why it is so rocky and full of mountains. What is a myth?
A story that's not real, that sometimes explain about their gods and goddesses.
Right. Today we're going to listen to two Greek myths. One is a story about what happened to a proud woman named Arachne. It sounds like a spider, yeah. The other is a myth about a selfish king named Midas.
Midas.
King Midas.
Oh, he's
I think
selfish?
you know about him.
Oh, you mean that king? Oh, he does everything and that big gold.
Listen to the Greek myth about Arachne. We suggest that your students listen to the myth twice. Well, you'll see. My daughter already knows. That's why we do homeschool, because when my daughter have trouble sitting still, right? She's like a regular 8-year-old. Here we go. So, this is about a spider.
Some of the myths that the Greeks told were about...
Okay, so let's see if we can... I think this is going to be hard to listen to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to download this because you can save the video. And then I'll have you listen to it separately.
Some of the myths that the Greeks told were about heroes or heroines, but some of them were meant just to tell how things began, and this is one of those stories. There was once a young woman named Arachne, and she was a gifted weaver. That means she could take thread or yarn, and running it across her large wooden loom, she could weave it into beautiful cloth for clothing, or to make a tapestry, which is sort of like a picture that you hang upon the wall, except that it's made out of yarn or thread. Now, so skilled was Arachne as a weaver that she became famous throughout the land, and people would come to see her work from miles away. "This is beautiful," they would say. "No one can do this as well as you can, except, of course, the goddess Athena, who invented weaving." And sometimes they would say to her, "Arachne, the goddess herself must have taught you." Now Arachne grew tired of hearing about the goddess Athena. "She never taught me anything," said Arachne. "Why, I taught myself how to weave, and I'm sick and tired of hearing about this Athena. I've never seen her work, and I don't think it's any better than mine." Now word of this got back to the goddess Athena, and she decided to come down and meet Arachne. But first, she disguised herself as an old woman, and she went to the studio where Arachne worked and looked at all her weaving, and then she said to her, "It's very lovely, my dear. I've never seen finer, except, of course, for the work of Athena herself." Arachne spun around and looked at her and said, "Athena, Athena, Athena, I'm sick of hearing about her. Why, if the goddess herself was standing in front of me, I would proudly put my work up against hers." And of course, suddenly the old woman turned into Athena and said, Let's see." Well, this shook Arachne, but she said, "All right, I'll do it. I'll show you that I'm better than you at this weaving business." And the two of them went to work. Each of them wove on her loom for a good half hour, and when they were finished and Arachne looked at what had been done, she had to admit that as marvelous as her work was, the work of the goddess Athena was even more beautiful. "I cannot live with this dishonor," said Arachne, and she rushed off, but Athena followed her. "What are you going to do?" said the goddess. "It is no disgrace to lose to a goddess." "I wanted to be the best and only the best," said Arachne. "I'm not interested in only being as good as I can be. I'm never going to weave again." "That would be a terrible waste," said Athena, "and we shall fix it so that you do weave again." And so she touched Arachne, and Arachne began to change shape, and in a moment she had turned into the very first spider. Now everyone knows how beautifully spiders can weave their webs. And do you know that to this very day, scientists call all the members of the spider family arachnids, in honor of the very first spider, Arachne.
Okay, that was a very good story. So, Xena, what craft was Arachne best at? What did she do very well?
What is that called again?
Huh?
What is that name called again?
Weaving.
Weaving.
So she was good at weaving, right? What is weaving?
Weaving means like you weave something, you can weave out like a clothes, a pant, or some shoes.
It's kind of like sewing, yeah. What does a spider weave?
Web, spider web, so they could have some meal to eat.
Why did Athena turn Arachne into a spider?
So she will be better at weaving.
Okay, and this actually, let's see the answer for that. And it says, after Arachne lost to Athena, she said she would never weave again, right? But Athena wanted to make sure that she would always weave. So she turned her into a spider.
Whoa.
What is this? I don't know if we're going to act out a myth. Usually I don't do these kind of extra things. I may do one after the class, because it's supposed to take an hour, but it usually only takes us about 20 minutes. Okay, so this is King Midas and a golden touch, right? So let's listen to that. So now we're going to listen to this, and yeah.
King Midas and the golden touch. Long, long ago, there was a king named Midas. Now King Midas was a good man with a good heart, but not the wisest king, as we'll hear. One day King Midas was riding his horse along the road near the big river, when suddenly he heard someone crying out for help. He pulled up on the reins of his horse and stopped the horse and looked around. And then he saw an old man out in the very middle of the river, and the old man was drowning. Without a thought for his own safety, King Midas leaped from the horse, ran down to the shore and kicked off his shoes, and swam out into the water. He reached the old man just in time. Pulling him from the waves, he dragged the old man back to the shore. And then he lay there, catching his own breath. And as he lay there, catching his breath, he heard a voice. The voice behind him said, "Well done, King Midas. and Midas spun around, and there he saw Dionysus. Who was Dionysus? Dionysus was a god. A god? Well, you see, the Greeks, who made up these stories so long ago, had to explain the way the world ran, and they didn't have our science. And so they thought there were many gods and goddesses with great powers. And one was a god of the sun, who raised the sun up in the morning and held it high at noon and set it down at night. And his sister, a goddess, did the same with the moon in the evening. There were gods and goddesses of war and of love and of the wind and the sea. But Dionysus, this god, was the god of wine and celebration. And now he said, "Well done, King Midas. You have saved the life of a friend of mine, a friend who unfortunately likes my wine too well, and it gets him into trouble sometimes. This time he fell into the river and would have drowned without you. And because you saved him, without even thinking of your own safety, I shall give you a wish. Anything for which you wish, you may have it." A wish? Anything, thought King Midas. And all he could think of was what he liked. And he liked gold, so he said, "I wish, my lord Dionysus, that anything I touch will turn to gold." Dionysus just looked at him and smiled. "Very well. Anything you touch will turn to gold. Look down at yourself." And when Midas looked down at his wet clothing, it had turned to gold from touching his body. He shook his hair, and the droplets of water shook out as droplets of gold. He thanked Dionysus and ran up to his horse and put a hand on the saddle, and it turned to gold. He touched the bridle, it turned to gold. He got up under the horse, his favorite horse, and said, "We shall have all the gold we want now." And he leaned forward and patted the horse. But the horse turned to gold. "My horse has turned to gold," thought Midas. "I cannot ride him any longer. Oh, well, with all the gold I shall have, I can buy all the horses I want." And he got down from the statue of the horse and began to walk home to his palace. And then he was so excited, he began to run, and he ran home. Then he reached the gates of his palace, and he saw the guards there. And he went up and touched the spears of the two guards, which turned to gold. The guards were astounded. Midas just laughed and went in through the gate and touched it, and it turned to gold. He went through the rooms of his palace, touching things here and touching things there, and each one would turn to gold. He was delighted. But at last he grew hungry. After all, he had a long morning riding his horse, saving the life of the old man, running home to his palace, and now dashing from room to room. So he said to his servants, "Bring me lunch, fish, I think, and wine." And he sat down at the dining room table, and he picked up his knife and fork, and they turned to gold. He picked up his plate, and it was shining gold. His chair, of course, had turned to gold as soon as he sat in it. Now they brought him the trout, the fish, and they set it on his plate. And Midas said, "This looks delicious." And using the golden knife and fork, he cut himself a piece of the fish and put it in his mouth and spat it out. "Phew, what's this?" The moment the fish had touched his tongue, it had turned to gold. "I have to try this again," said Midas. And he cut another piece. But again, he had to spit it out. "It's gold," he said. "I can't eat gold." He picked up his wine cup, which was gold. Without even thinking, he took a sip of the wine. "What's this? The wine has turned to gold, too. If I cannot eat and I cannot drink, I shall starve to death." And he sat there wondering how he would live. And as he sat there, unknown to him, the door opened behind him, and in came his beloved little daughter, the one person Midas loved the most in all the world. And she tiptoed up to surprise her father. And then she threw her arms around him and said, "Daddy!" He spun around and said, "Wait!" But it was too late. His beloved little girl had turned to a statue of gold. He freed himself from the embrace of her arms, frozen now. And he ran out of the dining room and out of the palace and back down the road as fast as he could, back to the place where he had met Dionysus. back to the place where he had saved the old man's life. He knew it at once, for the golden horse still stood on the road there. He ran down to the shore and began to cry loudly, my Lord Dionysus, help me! Please help me!" "I am here, Midas," said a voice, and the king spun around. There was Dionysus seated on a rock. "I had a feeling you'd be back sooner or later." "Oh, my Lord Dionysus," said the king, throwing himself on his knees before the god, "please take it back. Take back the golden touch. It has brought me nothing but misery. My beloved little girl, she's gone from me now. Please." "What have you learned, Midas?" "I have learned that there are many things more important than gold." "Yes, you have learned that. And, after all, you risked your life to save the life of another. You should not suffer for it. Very well, I shall take back the golden touch." And Midas looked down at his clothes, and they were made of cloth again. "Thank you, my lord," he said, and he leaped to his feet and rushed up to the road, and he touched his horse, which neighed for him. And he leaped up into the saddle and rode full speed back to his palace. When he got there, he didn't stop to touch the spears or the gate or any of the other things he had already turned to gold. He ran through the corridors and up the stairs, right to the dining room, and straight to where his little girl still stood, frozen, a golden statue. And he reached out a hand that was shaking, and he touched her. And in that moment, she came alive again, and she laughed with delight. She didn't remember what had happened. All she knew was that her father was laughing and crying and throwing her high in the air and kissing her. Well, Midas went back and he touched all of the things that he had touched and turned to gold before, and each one went back to its previous state. It went back to being wood or some other metal or cloth. And when he had done this with all of the objects, he left only the dinner plate and the knife and the fork and the cup of wine. And he had his servants place these on a table near to his throne, so that he might look at them and always remember that there are some things more important than gold. And that is the story of King Midas and the golden touch. And you know that to this very day you may sometimes hear people say, "He has a Midas touch," or "Everything she touches turns to gold." And the next time you hear someone say that, you'll know that the origin of that saying was this story, and you may remember that some things are more important than gold.
So, Zena, did you like that story? Okay. So, in this myth, King Midas saves a man's life. The god Dionysus gave him one wish as his reward. Do you remember what King Midas wished for?
Everything he touched will change to gold. He didn't say that's only something that won't turn to gold. He just said everything. He didn't even think that food shouldn't be turned to gold and humans shouldn't be turned to gold. He just think, oh, everything is gold. I'm rich.
Ah. Do you remember some of the things that turned to gold?
His lunch, his horse.
What's the most important thing that turned to gold?
His daughter.
Yeah, you didn't like that, huh?
And his chair also turned to gold while he sit
Even King Midas's daughter turned to gold when she touched him. King Midas was so unhappy that he asked Dionysus to take away the golden touch. What lesson do you think King Midas learned?
He learned that gold is not the most important thing.
Right, what's important?
The most important thing is your You.
Well, the things that are closest to you, your family, right?
Your love.
Yeah, love is more important than gold. So we have some questions here. Usually they have a assessment sheet. The assessment sheet will have those questions on there, and then you have the answer key. And here I will ask my daughter some questions. There were some questions before this, but I decided to skip it because I didn't want to make the this video too long. Okay, Zena, I'm gonna ask you some questions. What are the stories about? What are the stories about the Greek gods, and goddesses called? Okay, very good. And if she answered correctly, you press yes. Zena, pay attention. Pay attention, all right? What power did King Midas ask the god Dionysus to give him?
Golden touch.
Good. The story of Arachne explains how what creature came to be. Okay, very good. Spiders. And then there's an activity that she has to do. I'll show you. So it's like a thought bubble. And she's going to do that now. And then there's some questions that she has to write the answers to. So it's not only just giving the answers by or orally giving the answers. She also has to write the answers down. Okay, you can start now. Remember to put your name and the date. The date, I think, is the 22nd, February 22nd, 2019.
22nd. Why is it second?
22nd. ND. You don't have to do that. You just put 22. Okay, so this is the end of this lesson. As you can see, she scored with the assessment 100%. And then if you want to do something beyond the lesson, you can.
Craft. You know what is a craft?
And then you can add the attendance. And then you close it. And that is the end of this lesson. So I hope that you have enjoyed this, and hope we can deliver more of this to you. So the next one we will do is probably the Let the Olympics Games Begin. Let the Olympic Games Begin. That will be lesson 9. So goodbye. Happy traveling.